Welcome to the second episode of our series on homelessness. This one will feature, who are the homeless and what assistance is effective, bringing you a U.S. perspective. And that perspective is being brought to us by Carol and Tim Kane. I've known Carol since I was in high school, and we've stumbled across one another when she was a project leader at Boeing. Today, she's living in New Mexico with her lawyer husband, also retired, Tim. They're going to help us discuss who the homeless are and how to maybe reverse the associated hopelessness from a community and or personal perspective. We had a phenomenal insight last week with Tim Aubrey's presentation, but it was from a public perspective, from on high. And I'm hoping through this episode today and the one next week that we'll be zeroing in and personalizing the issue, personalizing it from the perspective of those that are actually in service, not necessarily in research, but also the homeless themselves. So without any further ado, Carol and Tim, if you'll introduce yourselves and we'll begin a discussion.
Okay. Well, as Perry said, I'm Carol Kane. Perry and I have known each other since the mid-60s and have connected at a couple of high school reunions and stayed in touch. And when he approached us about this webinar, I wasn't certain that we really had a whole lot to offer, but the more he talked to me, the more I thought, well, maybe we have more to offer than we realize. We've spent the last, almost 20 years in one way or another involved with either populations at risk or actual homeless people.
Your background in this field is extensive, from being foster parents to what you're doing today as a county advisor. You're being too humble. Your experience here is extensive, and your viewpoints, when I start poking you a little bit, I don't think they're provocative. I think they're based on solid and sound experience, but it is an experience that's US based and it's in New Mexico.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily echo the same experiences of those in Nova Scotia or in Seattle.
I think, Terry, that the homeless populations have a lot more in common across all borders than they have things not in common. People who suffer from mental illness, or what's known here as SUD, substance use disorder, they're the same. The way they're treated, the facilities available to them, they're going to vary, but we could meet recovering addicts in Edmonton, and they wouldn't be any different than recovering addicts in Seattle.
Okay, so while there may be various sources, the reality is when they hit the street or when
Absolutely.
they are viewed as homeless,
Yep.
and we were differentiating last week those that are in transition short term and those that are more stuck and in the system long term is one of the principal differentiators of the homeless. We've been zeroing in more on those that tend to get stuck and finding it difficult to get out. What has been your experience in actually service?
It started in Seattle, and it was shortly after marriage, and we lost a son to mental illness and drugs. And in our healing process, we said, well, let's foster some babies. Let's get some joy in the house. Well, they didn't like the idea that, one, we lived on a houseboat, and I guess they thought the child would fall in the water or something. They never heard of water babies. And then we found out, and then they wanted us to go to some draconian courses for a year, about 4 hours a week for a year. It was very restrictive and silly. So we did find out that we have lots of young people aging out of social services and who are still in high school. And we said, okay, we'll take them. And that's how we started our initial work with the homeless, or near homeless anyhow. And that was an experience that we won't go into now because it's not germane to what we're talking about. But a couple of them were actually homeless, living rough. Others came right from the facility. And these were not hardscrabble kids. I mean, one boy, his dad was a psychiatrist, his mother was a psychiatric nurse. He said, how does he become homeless? Others, both parents were, one was a nurse and the dad was a history teacher, history professor. It's across the board. It's not economics necessarily. It's
Were you seeing people in an urban context, suburban, or?
Oh, this was,
no,
we were right in downtown
we were
Seattle.
right in downtown
Yeah.
Seattle. We were 5 minutes from the central business district, in a very nice home overlooking Puget Sound.
Well, oh, so after they said we couldn't have foster kids on the houseboat, we said, oh, well, this foster program is too, I mean, it was unbelievably restrictive. So that's when we said, okay, we'll take the kids who are aging out of the social services system, because there was no place for them to go.
Right.
They literally at 18, they turned them out.
Oh.
And we said, okay, we'll take them. So we put the word out with various agencies, and pretty soon we had four guys.
Big, hairy, smelly guy.
And Tim was the stay-at-home parent. And the reason for that was that he was just better able to deal with boys. But we didn't want to take in girls because we were concerned that there might be, if there was ever an issue with Tim being male and young women in the house, if they were ever to, raise a question about his behavior, which, was idiotic, but you don't know, we said, okay, we'll just take boys. So at one point we had 4 boys, and then my dad took ill, so we had to take my dad in. So we had this house full of males, and
I was still outnumbered.
and we still. So what we did that until I retired in 2000 and late 2001. We left Seattle in 2002, and by then we had one of the young men we asked to leave because he attempted suicide while he was with us, and we said that was the one thing they could not do, because my son committed suicide.
Mhm.
One of them joined the Air Force, one of them was in his own apartment, and one left to go back to school. So we thought that was, that's a pretty good outcome. And then we took time basically for ourselves and had a really lovely retirement in rural New Mexico. And then in 2005, my older son also committed suicide, and he had been heavily into drugs. And that was a real wake-up call. So at that point, we said, okay, now we've got to move our focus to the problem of drugs. And his father wanted to make a donation to Oxford House. And I know you all know what Oxford House is because you have them in Canada. And I said, well, please earmark it for New Mexico because we don't have any Oxford houses. And they are, if you're not aware of what they do, they're self-governing, self-supporting homes for people in recovery, and gets no government money except the salaries of local outreach workers. So we opened houses in Albuquerque, and we actually got to 19 Oxford houses in Albuquerque, houses for men, houses for women. And somewhere around what was like the end of 16,
yeah.
Things were looking bad in Albuquerque, and the outreach worker was not working. We had a replacement of our original worker, and we were there, and we said, look, this whole thing is falling apart. We will move to Albuquerque from New Mexico, and we'll do that job. We'll do it for free. We don't want to lose what we got, what we gained here. And they said, well, no, don't do that. What we'd really rather you do is move to southern New Mexico and open houses there, because in case you're not aware of it, New Mexico is the 5th largest state geographically and the 2nd least populated state in the United States. And it's a huge state. It's very rural. It is a majority state. I think we're the only state in the union that our population is essentially Hispanic and indigenous peoples. They outnumber everybody else. So they said, no, move to southern New Mexico and open houses. And that's what we did. We came here in 2017, and we opened 5 houses, 3 for men, 2 for women. And just about a year and a half ago, they said, okay, now you've done such a good job. We're gonna find somebody who's a paid outreach worker. The state's gonna pay someone to do the job you've been doing for free. So that left us free to do other things, including get involved at the state, local and state level in various housing initiatives that are targeted at special populations and the homeless, quote unquote, in general. So I don't know, is that like too much information? Not enough?
I mean, that's the journey.
Yes.
The journey up in pieces, but that is an extraordinary trip from the pain that you've suffered yourselves to the role that you then played in turning a negative into a positive. And by that, I mean taking constructive action to try and address the issue. I don't know how unique you are. Is there a network that you belong to, or a network that you've formed of others who have taken the initiative themselves to make a difference in their community? That was one of the things that was really striking, Carol.
It's really a great story. When we came here, we had been here for 2 months early on before we moved to Silver City, which is 2 hours away from here. And we originally, when we came to New Mexico from Seattle, we thought we would live here. So we came here for a couple of months. We made offers on 3 properties. They all fell through. We ended up buying a house in Silver City that was classic, all adobe. It was in wretched shape, and we loved it. And we spent, 12 years there, rehabbing the house, getting involved in the community, and just having altogether a terrific time. We had horses. We had a house we heated with wood. Want to make this clear. I did it for selfish motives, because had I not done this, I think I would have died. If any of you are parents, there is nothing worse than the death of a child. And the death of 2 children is just about the most awful thing you can imagine. And fortunately, Tim was very supportive and loved my boys as much as I did, and knew that this was essential. 50% of the parents who lose a child divorce.
More, 75%.
75% divorce. And it's understandable. So we were really clear that in order for us to survive, in order for me to survive this, and in order for our marriage to survive, we had to look outward. We had to look at what we could do. And as I'm fond of saying, so that no mother ever experiences what I did. I don't know that I've succeeded, but it was selfish on my part. It was what I needed to do to survive and to thrive. And it's worked. And I still hear my boys, they talk to me and they say, way to go, mama, way to go.
It's interesting how individuals, and several that we've met and talked to over the course of the years in some of our interviews, have taken a personal life experience that was a tragedy, and the answer was to get them out of that depression, was to take initiative and make a positive contribution back. I'm not going to profess a religious perspective, but it is interesting what God has done when he creates negatives on earth, and how evil can sometimes be the very basis of the turnaround. So I acknowledge that. I think that's when we lay on a beach at a reunion, and I got chatting with you about your experience and what happened with you and your son, that was never forgotten. And I think it's contributed to us being here today. So, Tim, what's your background? I mean, I gather you're a lawyer. What field of law did you practice in?
Tax and family law. I stay away from criminal because I wasn't sure who the criminals were when we walked into the courtroom. The DEA agents and others testifying. But Carol saved me from that, and that was way back in 92. So I've done some illegal law things, doing things in the jurisdictions where I wasn't licensed, but I haven't been in a courtroom in a long, long time.
But that that created some type of a framework. I mean, I know you and or Carol alluded earlier to the fact that you were conscious of the fact that there were some risks that you might be getting into, and made decisions to mitigate or minimize that, and knew full well that you were playing in the world of the public, which is a governed world of law.
Yeah.
And you were working with children, girls sometimes. You had to recognize that you're going to get public scrutiny if things go wrong.
Absolutely. And I did do a lot of work with children, representing the child and the child's interest against social services, where I learned maybe not to like social services very much. Now, of course, we have to cooperate with them in what we do, but I've never been a big fan of social services.
Let's dig into the role of government a little bit, or public services or agencies that say we're here to help. Carol, you and I talked a little bit about the age and the days of Ronald Reagan, deinstitutionalization, government here to help. We see a problem and we're going to address it. What do you think is behind so much of what we're wrestling with today?
Oof. Well, that certainly Reagan's closing all of the hospitals back in the 80s. That was the triggering event.
Those are the mental health facilities.
Yes.
Well, while Carol gets your thought, what happened then, all of the penitentiary jails, all those jails and the penitentiaries became our new warehouse for people with mental illness.
In the US, we say the biggest mental health facility we have is the prison system.
Yeah. But the prison system itself became the fallout. They didn't actually go to community. They ended up bouncing from community into corrections.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And if they weren't mentally ill when they went in, they certainly were when they got out.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned you earlier before the session when we were having a discussion about someone who will be facilitating the final episode of this series, working in corrections with the John Howard Society here in Canada, saying that the first words out of her mouth were that as people are discharged from corrections, they're discharged into shelters. That there is literally no preparation other than there's a place in community to go back to, and it is a facility, but it's essentially empty. And whether or not there's treatment available or services to help them get reintegrated, it sounds like we've got a void when it comes to child welfare, which you've been involved in, corrections, which you're aware of, mental health, which you're certainly familiar with. Tim Aubrey last week was talking about inflow, and how much of the inflow is coming from our public services system that is unprepared to help people. And I'm not quite sure why. You would think that community would be making it very noisy about where these people are coming from and that they're not ready. Have you had involvement with the community or the county?
Oh yeah. In fact, well, one of the many other things that we've gotten involved in is the restart of the New Mexico Innocence and Justice Project, which, if those of you who know about the Innocence Project in the United States, it was started by Barry Scheck and one of the other Dream Team lawyers from OJ's trial. And what they did was they have gotten, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 270, 280 exonerations in the United States based on DNA evidence. And some of these cases are mind-bogglingly horrible. So we had the opportunity to help the New Mexico and Innocence Justice Project get restarted after they were cut from the law school. So we've been involved with that for a couple of years. And as a result of that, the head of that asked me to sit on the New Mexico Sentencing Commission Behavioral Health Working Group, and that's a mouthful. And our charter is to propose to Department of Corrections for New Mexico programs and things that we can do that will, I say optimize, but that's probably too positive, too generous a word, that will reduce our recidivism rate, which is currently sitting at, I think, 65%, and help people transition from incarceration to life on the outside, and then track the results to see which of these programs are working. So we're just getting to the point now where we're starting to identify specific programs. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. We have no provision for people coming out of incarceration having a place to live. We have something called Section 8 housing, which is basically government subsidized housing. If a person on parole moves in with somebody who has Section 8 housing, they lose the Section 8 housing. Now, how terrible is that? We can't take them. Oxford House cannot take people directly from incarceration. They have to go through some sort of intervening, like step-down program, which is book solid. So we can't take them. We could for a while, but then they took that policy away. Or they rescinded that policy. I don't know where they're going, and it's a real nightmare.
Well, and you're dealing with volume. You're trying to serve an ocean with a cup.
Exactly.
It is becoming massive. And when we talk about the streets of Seattle or the streets of San Francisco, well, I have heard that Milwaukee, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with what's going on in Milwaukee, but I have heard that Milwaukee has a story to tell that's positive. Now, I'm not,
Yes.
I really should be. Do you have any color about what they're doing in Milwaukee?
No, I just had heard the same thing, Perry, that was one of the cities that seems to have, gotten their arms around this problem.
Well, I am familiar with one of the planners from that area who very simply said, prepare the people, prepare the community, and develop the support services beforehand.
Yeah.
And preparing the people is the personalization and the understanding of the relevance of agency, that the person has to make a commitment, the community has to make a commitment, and there's got to be something more than just a house. And Tim Aubrey made that point last week, that even though he's a strong advocate for housing first, he thinks that's a misnomer. The reality is it's a more complete option than just a house. There is treatment services and an array of professionals and volunteers that indicate the community commitment. Let's talk about agency for a minute. When you were serving individuals, we've heard the word agency come up over and over again, that there really is no cure for the hopelessness if that individual isn't prepared to acknowledge that they're going to play a role in the solution. What was your experience in working with the individuals and the extent to which they just hung around or were ready to make a commitment?
Well, it was necessary for membership in a house that they get employment. And if they didn't have to work, if they had some sort of disability income or the retirement income, they had to go out and volunteer each day.
This is Oxford House.
Yeah, we're back in the Oxford House. And had to obey the house rules. This was not the housing first model. This was a safe and sober house model. And so if they drank, they slid backwards. They were rejected from the house based on the assessment of the membership or admission that they were drinking. They were asked to leave, and they did. So some of it was forced. There's some controversy there as that's the best way to go. If a person has one relapse, on average, from interviews, it takes a person about six relapses before he will stay clean. And so for him to have, he or she to have one relapse, it probably is asking too much. And we do, the headquarters keep statistics, which I don't believe. I don't think they're as successful as they say, because they said if you stay with the Oxford House for 6 months, you have an 85% chance of staying sober the rest of your life. If you stay in an Oxford House for 1 year, it goes up to the low 90s.
Yeah.
Well, that's not our personal experience here. People
and we think they rule out the first 30 days because that's critical.
Yeah.
If a new resident makes it through the first 30 days, there's a really good chance that they're going to stay long enough to get their life back in order.
That was a point, it wasn't on the list that Tim Aubrey provided us of some of the challenges, but it was a point that came up in the discussion, was early intervention was fundamental. If the person could not be engaged early enough, they fell into a culture And they fell into a series of expectations that meant it was extremely difficult to root them out.
Harry, if we could regale you with some of the stories told to us by residents of their early lives and the things that happened to them that landed them in one of our Oxford houses. I mean, make your hair stand on end.
Well, give me one. We've been having our hair stand on end all week.
Okay, good. Here we go. Here's this young man, delightful, absolutely delightful. I just wanted to mother the heck out of him. He was the youngest of 5 boys. And one of the things that was a powerful memory from his childhood was helping his mother find a vein in her neck that she could use to shoot up.
Mhm.
That was his mother. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had, one of our favorite stories was a guy we got from the federal prison in Tucson, and he was let out on a compassionate release. He was 64 years old when we got him. See, we could take people directly from federal prison. We can't take them from the state. He was 64 years old. He had spent 49 years of his life behind bars. 49 years. He went in prison. He went in as a juvie, and he came out at 64. Well, we found him absolutely delightful. He was a colorful guy. He was a bank robber. He's like, was it Willie Sutton who said, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is.
Mm.
He would go through his money, and then he'd rob a bank, and he'd go back inside. He'd been in every major prison in the United States. He had committed some horrific things in prison, which he shared with us. But there was something very redeemable about him. And, he took to Oxford House like the proverbial duck to water. He loved to clean. He loved to cook. He had one relapse. He drank and he was evicted. And he bounced around for a while. And now he's back in the local lockup because he couldn't abide by his parole requirements were that he check in. And he missed a couple of check-ins, and he had a bracelet, and they tracked him, they picked him up. So he's back in jail. In fact, I went to his hearing 2 weeks ago. So we get, and his mother ran a bar and his father was a drug dealer. And that's, from South Central LA. So you wonder how these people even survived childhood, much less made it to adulthood. Their life stories are horrific.
But in both of those instances, and we talked a little bit about this, but we haven't elaborated on it. And I don't want you to feel that I'm pointing at you people, but the family plays a fundamental role in the beginning of some of these issues.
It's critical.
You had 2 boys that committed suicide, which you've mentioned, and drugs was the issue.
They were, but
what were your insights?
But both of my boys had the misfortune of, I think, inheriting the genes on their paternal side. Their dad, who was a prominent physician and basically an internationally recognized researcher, he was bipolar, and he drank.
Yeah,
which is one of the reasons we divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Their grandmother was bipolar, so you could see this just plunking down the generations, and unfortunately, my boys reached a certain age and that manifested itself. And my older son especially got very into drugs. My younger son was hospitalized 5 times. And that's a whole other, I don't even want to go into the mental health care system. But no, they, essentially the deck was stacked against them.
Yeah.
And as much as their dad and Tim and I, and all 3 of us worked together, we moved heaven and earth to get them the care that they needed. And it still wasn't enough. As my younger son said once to Tim, think of the worst day of your life. He said, that's what every day is like for me.
Well, it's an extremely difficult thing to talk about. You've learned how to talk about it, and you've learned how to reflect on it. Was there anything that you could reflect upon that would say, if we'd only done something different? You mentioned a marriage, a good choice in a marriage or a bad choice.
Well, actually, if I'd married somebody else, that I don't think it would have happened. No, I don't know that there's anything specific that either his father or I could have done, because even when we were divorced, we collaborated, we cooperated. It was not a divorce with enmity. He understood why I was leaving him. He was always very conscientious about support and having the boys visit. No, I mean, we had really quite an amicable separation. So
so family was there. Was community there? Was community there? We've gotten carried away with the housing first to the point that people don't seem to be understanding what constitutes a community. A community that cares is more than just caring. It's not just words. There needs to be something there, that it needs to be timely. When I was involved with developing the community service system for people with disabilities, guided by the principles of living as normal a life in as normal a setting as possible, and preparing the person, preparing the community, develop the service systems in advance. We had caseworkers that worked at the individual level, and we had community workers that worked at the public level, and they collaborated all the time about what do we need to do to get people off that waiting list or on a waiting list out of an institution. And they worked in a collaborative manner. So that what we were learning at the individual level, we were sharing publicly, and that information helped considerably in getting community commitments and finding people in those communities that were prepared to step up like yourselves. But I don't think the system seems to be top heavy or bottom heavy, and the collaboration between the two seems to be weak. What has been your experience in working with public sector? Tim, you've alluded to it already. Some of the
very little. In fact, there is very little here where we live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and generally in the entire state, there's very little in terms of government-sponsored homes and support systems. We have lots and lots of parole officers and social workers that are available to help, but that's not enough. There's, as far as I know, no public supported housing specifically for people with
this was typical. I was in this very long Zoom meeting this afternoon, which was a state level meeting, and all kinds of people were invited and basically asked to tell the governor what they needed in terms of clearing the way to deal with the backlog of housing that we have in this state, which is horrific. So, I mean, I'm listening, but I'm also looking at email while I'm on this Zoom. And a gang email came out from this lady who said, I need your help. This is it's called New Mexico Leaders in Recovery. And it goes out to probably 200 people. She said, I have a young man who is he is disabled and he's mentally ill. She said, he's been sleeping in my office because I don't have any place for him to go. And she said, I'm going on vacation and I don't know what to do with him.
When we reach that point where the issue is we don't even have a place to sleep anymore, we're very late in the exercise. We're very, very late in prevention. We're now into a holding game. And when you were going through what you were going through, or what others are first facing, that there's a breakdown in the family or there's a breakdown in their situation, to get in and then have earlier intervention is to be able to make a phone call someplace that I am at the beginning of my wit's end. Is there someone out there that can give me some guidance?
Right. So I took a break and I mentioned it to Tim and he said, well, what about so-and-so? I said, brilliant. So I got an email and I emailed this lady and I said, okay, I said, I think this could be a resource for you. Now, mind you, it's a 3.5 hour drive from where she is to where this facility is, almost 4. So I'm not sure if it worked out, but I connected her with this lady that I know. But so much of this is, sort of off the radar.
Yeah.
It's who know, it's personal connections. And, thinking, oh, that'll work. Let me try that. As opposed to some actual network that's there.
But this
Yeah.
this is what a caseworker or someone who says, okay, I do have a legitimate caseload, it's reasonable, and I have knowledge of the resources within my community. When I get that phone call, I go through my mental Rolodex of where I am going to find that resource. That person becomes an aid to the parent that's never been in that situation before.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden their teenager is overreacting, or their first dose of drugs, or they come home. When that begins and the family is overwhelmed, in the old days, you had 9 other kids in the house that provide some degree of social control.
Yeah.
But yeah, the building of a community that is already there, or the building of a community such as Chris and Marg will probably tell us a little bit about later, is how do you find and begin to build the glue that enables a community to be supportive of those who are on the fringe and starting to fall out.
Well, you need a whole lot of Carols.
Well, and the other problem is that we have, and I don't know whether you have this either in Calgary or in Canada, but the stovepiping, that, somebody has their little span of control, and, it may be for their town, their city, or even their county, but it doesn't cross over the whole state, or it doesn't cross over the region of the state. And we see that time and time again. And it's so frustrating, because sometimes the proverbial left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, or that the right hand even exists.
I want to come back to family for a moment, because it does. I'm sensing that we need more mothers again. We've in the last 50 years put them in the workforce. They wanted to get in the workforce. We had affirmative action. A lot of things have happened. We have feminism to get the women the equality that they sought relative to men. And something's missing from the house that was once there. And some feel, well, that's the state. It will pick that up. I mentioned in earlier webinars that University of Calgary social work has a program, and there were people there that would say, yeah, the family is archaic now. It's up to the state to take on that responsibility. But it seems to me one of the correlations of many of the things we're talking about here is the lack of the traditional family, if you will, where there was in fact someone at home when that kid was slipping or when that kid had a need. Is this offensive, what I'm saying, or am I touching on something that really ought to be talked about more often?
I think, that it would be easy, or that would be the easy solution to say, we have to discourage mothers from going into, staying in the workforce. But I think that, I think industry plays a part in this, and industry and government as in a partnership. Why can't we have co-located childcare facilities with workplace, so that, a mother can go on her coffee break and spend time with kids, go have lunch with her kids. And maybe they go to nursery school or they go to preschool, nursery school, and then kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And, mom can be there. I agree with you. For the most part, mothers bring a unique relationship and a unique set of skills, but there are plenty of fathers who are very motherly. So I wouldn't rule that out. I think it's, what do you want to do? What are you most comfortable doing? I mean, there are some mothers I wouldn't want to be mothered by.
That's clearly not the point that I'm making. But
no, I understand. But I'm saying that, you're talking about agency.
Yes.
Well, why not give people that agency to say, yeah, I would really like to be able to pursue my career, but not at the expense of being a mother.
Yeah.
And that frequently is the trade-off.
Well, and it's also hard. I mean, to be honest about all this, it's extremely difficult in the economy that we have, where 2 incomes are almost fundamental in order to have a house and have a family. Absolutely.
But the way we do that, why can't we do that with more co-located child facilities with a workplace?
Shirley, a comment or a point you want to make?
Yeah, I think interesting points raised, but I do agree with you, Perry. Like, if you'd asked me that question, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I would have been all gung-ho on the feminist bandwagon and said, hell no, like, women's rights, and we should be in the workforce, and we have careers and we have great minds. But after, after a few years of being a mother and having the support of a really great husband and understanding that we have our individual strengths and roles to play, and that really ultimately, what is the purpose of family, right? The purpose of and that's my personal opinion. Like, I'm not saying that I impose that upon anyone, but my personal opinion now has evolved to the point where as a mother, as a wife, as a caretaker of community, because I am, like, that nurturing does come a lot from women's side. We have a lot to contribute. We've done it historically, ancestrally. We have experience. We're designed that way. And it's not to say that we don't have amazing minds and amazing capabilities in other areas and other fields, but definitely a lot of us are the nurturing type, or given the opportunity or given the right supports, we can. So I think that the role of the woman has now become downplayed, where we have to do it all. We have to have a career, we have to be successful, we have to work, we have to take care of the house, we have to take care of the kids, we have to do it all now. So I kind of feel like that feminist movement has not done us justice. We're not looking for equality. We're not equal to anybody. I'm not equal to the next woman. I'm not equal to my husband. My husband's not equal to me. But I do believe that each of us has a role to play, and to sort of provide the environment where each person can shine and do that role well. And it speaks to the point you made last time, and even today you mentioned this thing about, the family is now redundant. Wow, like, if the family's redundant, where does that put us? Are we talking about, a science fiction movie where we're all just battery cells providing energy for the androids or something? It's a serious issue. Ultimately, families are what creates society, and society and community is the caretaker of each other. So I feel strongly about that. Like, I think, what Carol had mentioned about picking up the phone and making that connection, even though it's like 4 hours drive away, that connection, if it worked, may have provided a better environment and solution for that individual, as opposed to a system or a institution or something like that, right? Yes, we need those, because not all of us are experts in social work or mental health or things like that, or how to connect you to a job and things like that. But ultimately, that is the role of community, right? And we've sort of handed it over to these systems and said, well, the systems will take care of it. And then I think the troubling part is that, okay, then we go into this kind of tunnel of consultations and how are the systems operating and this and that, where if we just provided that really solid community environment, a lot of that could be avoided, and possibly a lot of resources saved. But again, it's just my opinion.
Sure, you've picked up on a point that I didn't really expect. When I do these webinars, I'm not quite sure where we're going to land. I expected much of the discussions over the first couple would be about the transitions from failing public service systems that simply are dumping people in community. I think that point's been made, but we've landed on something that came as a little bit of a surprise, which is the preventative strategy of family first, not housing first. And what you've been doing, Carol and Tim, as an observer on the outside and listening to you and watching, you've simulated a family.
Well, it's interesting that you point that out, because one of the things that we have noticed, and parenthetically, we counted up the number of times we've moved individually before we got married and since we've been married. How many times do you think we've moved? 57. 57 times. Now, and
They haven't caught me.
And we weren't running from the bill collectors, but each time we've moved, after the first big move, I realized that, the community was not waiting to welcome me. They didn't care whether I moved in or not. So I had to figure out a way to essentially make a new community for myself every time I moved. So fast forward, we moved here in 2017. We live on a cul-de-sac. There were 7 houses. And when we moved in, I met the lady across the street, and we immediately bonded. And I knew everybody in the cul-de-sac, but I didn't have all their contact information. Gentleman across the street suffered a fall, ended up in the hospital, died in the hospital, and his wife was with him in the emergency room. After he passed away, she didn't have one person's phone number to call to come and pick her up.
No.
And I said, this is awful. So I went around to every house, and I knew everybody, But I went around to every house and I said, if you'll give it to me, I want your cell phone and your email. So that if anything happens, and I'm going to publish a list of everybody who lives in our cul-de-sac, so that if anything happens, you can pick up the phone and call any one of us. We are our own little community right here. Everybody was thrilled.
And as that community, there's a word that comes to mind, that you are willing to work together.
Yes.
That in the design of houses now, we don't have a porch in the front yard, it's in the backyard. We used to be able to, when the screen door slapped, we knew it across the street. We talked to one another. It takes years to get to know your neighbors in suburbia.
Exactly.
Some among us have spent their time in building stronger communities. Chris, Mark, do you want to jump in here and tell me a little bit about what your experience has been with communities that weren't functioning as communities, and what you've been doing?
Yeah. Ours is a bit of a different situation because we are in right downtown Toronto, bordering on St. Jamestown, which is, I don't know whether it's true, but it's called the most densely populated area in North America. So there's somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people living in 18 different high rises. And it's about 60 to 70 different cultures that live in that area. And we live one block south of that area. So our story is a bit similar, but without, and not, right? But we decided about 20 years ago that we were going to get out of our cars, right? And live in community, because we just felt that was the way that we wanted to live as a couple. And we started by picking up the garbage on the street, right? And talking to people. And we realized that the work we wanted to do as a couple was to go into St. Jamestown. And that was in our backyard, right? There's a lot of stuff going on because there's the Sri Lankan revolution was going on. So a lot of Tamil refugees were coming into St. Jamestown at the time. So we had our work cut out for us. And I had come from more of a policy kind of position in different areas of my life that Perry well knows. And I was sick and tired of professionals. I had 500 professionals in my last company that I had sold, social workers, psychologists, addictions counselors. And one of them, a psychologist told me that he couldn't teach somebody how to get rid of his cigarette addiction unless that person did a certain number of things. And I was disgusted at the way that they treated that person. And I said, that's it. We've got to get back down into community, and professionals are important, but oh my gosh, they are not the only answer to this. So we really, in our model, created what we call community assistance. So we're saying our charity was to empower the people in St. Jamestown. So all of the work that we've done so far in our programming is to identify leaders in St. Jamestown from the representative cultures and train them. And what we did was broke down the functions of social work was the first one, so that many of the mainly women that we trained were doing information referral, short-term counseling, but small C counseling. They worked in the parenting center, so, when I listened to you, what we were doing is building a community in a place where there's huge turnover every year. But it's just been such an amazing experience, because people coming from other countries, they understand community. They haven't lost a lot of the links that we have. And I, for one, am humbled by what I've learned, because I didn't grow up with a grandmother or grandparents near me or aunts and uncles, and you watch the power of community to support people who are on the verge of homelessness. You understand the leverage of prevention that you can have if you are right on the ground, and then not who the volunteers are. And that's why I was raising my hand earlier, because when you were talking about community, you talked about a community as volunteers.
Mhm.
And I think of community as neighbors, right?
Mhm.
And they're not people that we just, a service agency calls in to have a volunteer as part of the service team. Like, to me, the model has to be turned on its ear so that the neighbors are around the individual who needs the support. They care and support that individual, because professionals come and go, right? And my gosh, right now in downtown Toronto, there's a blockage of our siloed system. We call social workers and ask for support in housing, and they say, Margaret, don't even get that person on our waiting list.
Hmm.
So right now we are struggling, and we were actually merging with another charity that has more homeless people than we do, because we're more preventative in the work that we do. And we're trying to find the unseen. We try to find people who are at risk for suicide, depression, mental health issues, and addictions, and figure out how to build community around them, right?
2 points that I'd like to make that you've just brought, you've
Perry,
surfaced. One, you know full well, and you've alluded to it, my concern of relying on the professional, my concern with relying on government. I think those should be options of last resort. I think they are needed. But some years ago, we were entertaining a Japanese entourage that had come to Edmonton to look at the service system that we had built, that some were viewing as somewhat successful. When he was walking through downtown, he was surprised to see that we had our curbs leveled so that wheelchairs could be moved, or someone in a wheelchair could easily come up a curve. And he said, we don't need to do that in Japan. And I thought, and why not? He said, because if someone sees someone at the curb, they'll help them. He said, you in North America are so driven by this appetite for independence that you've forgotten the relevance of the glue that holds us together as a community, of actually working together. Not to say we're looking for people to be helpless, but when you pick up a piece of paper that you didn't throw on the ground, when you smile at someone in an elevator, as opposed to being terrified that they might, there's a neighborliness. And I alluded to one other point that I wanted to make, that when we were developing group homes in the early stages of developing accommodation for people that were leaving institutions, and I mentioned to Tim last week that we spent time in those neighborhoods as community workers or community developers, talking to the neighbors about our kids, our friends, and our plans. And he asked why, and I said, because these are neighbors, and we wanted to make sure there's goodwill in these neighbors, because you never know. Some years later, when we did some evaluations, the neighbors were surveyed, and they said, you didn't come to us when you needed a cup of sugar. You tried to function as independents, and yet that goodwill was out here untapped, and we wanted to be part of your community. So I think there's plenty of goodwill out there. I think we've forgotten about it in our thirst to create jobs and create professionals and create this hierarchy. Instead of working building these lateral relationships that provide us with the insurance that when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, that there's a spare bed next door. Blah, blah, blah. That's go ahead.
At the risk of sounding like a Luddite, I think that, we've certainly young people, even more so than, us who are a little bit older, we've developed relationships with technology, not with people.
No, my son runs a tutoring agency. He said it has gotten out of hand. It's becoming epidemic. These kids do not have social relationships.
Yeah.
They don't make eye contact.
Yep.
Many of them don't even know how to read.
Yeah.
They'll go to Google first when they could go to the index of an encyclopedia and get the answer in the blink of an eye, but they have become relied, and the educational system is expecting it of them.
Yeah.
So,
but I just want to go back to the point that Margaret was making about this community of St. Jamestown and this issue of mothers at home and all the rest of that. And if you look at St. Jamestown, it's an interesting community because there are no roads. There's these 18 or 20 apartment buildings. There's 40,000 people, and they sit in a community that is theirs, and they share there's a commonality to it. They're newcomers. They bring culture. Those cultures naturally connect with each other. They naturally celebrate. And so, and that includes children, it includes youth, it includes adults. And if you look at that, when somebody needs help, they don't have to ask for it. People have already understood that they need help. If somebody gets that third or fourth job to help pay the rent, somebody already knows that they need childcare and they contribute to that. So what we do is a very small piece, and we're sort of a barnacle on a system that really, really works well because people are looking out for each other.
Those strategies are preventative strategies. Have you had experience of fallout where the disappointment, we have not succeeded, the family and or the community have not, we've got a criminal, we've got a child welfare issue, we've got a mental, you're obviously stretching and the reach of a community in order to contain those excessive issues, but you're not professing utopia.
Well, of course not. But in the absence of the support, you know, there have been many times that we've had to talk down somebody who's in a psychotic break.
Yeah.
Right? We can't get them into a merge.
Yeah.
There's domestic violence situation. Yeah. COVID was terrible. Yeah. For that reason. Yeah. Right. And that's why we're thinking, what can we do for prevention? Because we've had a number of people, you talk about homelessness, people getting evicted. Right. And we're lucky because we have good relationships with the landlords. Right. And so they let us know when they're going to evict somebody. And so we can go in and figure out what are some of the reasons for that and help that person sort of adjust, not all the time. And I don't want to paint a rosy picture. This is hard work. Right. And we have to think of renewable mechanisms because neighbors are neighbors, you know, and they're not always available. You have to think of backups. You know, there's a lot of planning and renewal that's involved in thinking about these kind of systems.
Yeah.
So when you talk to government, Chris or Tim or Carol, when you talk to government, do they understand that a bottom-up model is probably the one where you can get some volume as opposed to
any on the ground in the trenches worker understands that totally and completely. They get that, and that's the attraction to organizations like us, because the work that should be done is in fact being done, and it's way more than the landlord. I mean, we have connections with the police, so before something drastic happens, the police will call us or call one of our people within the community or somebody else within the community. So that's what I was trying to explain. It's not a utopian thing, but it's a structural thing for a community, and that's what a commitment is, right? That when you talk about commitment with community.
But wait a minute, Chris, and I may regret what I'm going to venture into here. Some years ago, I moved into Alberta. Alberta is a relatively young province. I mean, it certainly had a farm history and a farming culture, which was very supportive of one another, and that's very much the nature of an agrarian economy. But as we started to grow, as our cities went, when I was here, from 150,000 to over 1 million in Edmonton in the 50 years I've been here, it's awfully difficult to say we've got neighbors. We've got difficult to say you've got neighbors in a brand new suburbia. Yeah.
Right. You've created a suburbia and you've created the problem.
Yes, that's
putting it in a suburbia.
We have this.
So you're talking about structural changes. Yeah. This is not Band-Aid solutions. You've got to make structural changes, right? And you've got to look at the way the communities are structured and how are you going to pull people together? Yeah. And all we're saying is that St. Jamestown is a very interesting example because it's structurally different. Like the infrastructure is different and the community is different there. And we're not doing
in multiculturalism, we're encouraging people to work within their cultures, believing that those cultures will be supportive. The church builds similar cultures around the church that people would support. The Jewish society, as we know, is a worldwide phenomenon that no matter where you are in the world, same with the Rotary or whatever. I mean, there are organizations that work very hard to build a network, if you will, a social network that will be supportive in times of need. Now, whether or not they are adequate to deal with some of the more fundamental issues we've talked about. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, Perry, those are the people that we go to for support. the churches, the barbers, the haircutters, you know, the private foundations. We are a private charity. We don't go to government for this kind of work.
Well, it's interesting how much goodwill there is when it's one-on-one. When I was doing leadership conferences or leadership workshops for executives in large organizations, and I was trying to teach them how to build collaboration within their organizations, I said that there is a vocabulary and it has only 2 phrases in it. One of them is thank you. What's the other one? And it's a 4-letter word called help. Now, there's nothing more significant to help build a community than to ask for help. I know the police in our suburb have street parties. And at those street parties, they organize a way to bring the neighbors together that they have not met before to talk about, you know, safety and security and issues within their community. Okay, enough here. Let's see if there are any other hands. Tom, you've had experience in a family where I talked about, you know, 5 boys almost raising themselves when mom went out to work. I don't think any of you face the issues which we've been talking about today, or have had the experience in venturing into homelessness. But I gather one of your children has dove deeply into the world of helping the homeless out in Toronto.
Yeah, my daughter is Zoe Dodd. You probably run into her in all of this housing business that's gone down in Toronto, and what we've had here. I don't know all of my daughter's views, but I know she's a strong advocate for housing first and for trying to protect the housing that's in Toronto to accommodate the street people. And it's an ongoing fight. You know, you've got people like Ford in Ontario who is really not sympathetic. He wants to believe he's more intent on building in the Greenbelt, of course, than anything else.
I thought he was against that.
Who, Ford?
Let's stay out of the politicization if we can, but it's
no,
very easy to beat up on politicians nowadays.
Well, anyway, that's sort of just come down recently because of his obvious duplicity on the whole subject. But anyway, yeah, no, I come from a good family, and we've all been really supportive of each other. But, you know, really in raising kids, and I've raised 5, that's where the difficulties have arisen. And there's the families are all over the place. They're from different backgrounds now and everything else. And the family structure is just not there to support what has evolved for most of these kids.
Well,
some are doing really well.
I'm delighted that we've sort of ventured and jumped into the relevance of family, community, neighborliness, care, help. But I'm not sure how this is going to work today with what we have lying on the streets. It may be a way to reduce the volume that's finding its way onto the streets, but how do we start clearing the streets? And in the Middle Ages, and in Michael Foucault's book, which I've alluded to numerous times, he says society has in fact ultimately does arrive at an answer. It just cleans the streets. It creates new institutions and it dumps them into those facilities, saying the pressure that community is putting upon the public sector is so great, we need to find an answer again. And my fear is we are going to once again, and maybe it's not a fear, maybe they're better off going into some large facility again, which is dehumanized, but maybe less dehumanized than lying on a street at 30 below zero in Edmonton, or going to a football stadium where you're housed for a couple of days. Where are we going to end up if we don't solve this problem? I mean, the consequences of it going on day after day after day, where people will not venture into their downtown, will not use their LRT, somehow or another, this is going to result in a politician someday, we will clean the streets. I think they tried that in New York, and if I'm not mistaken, they got some credit for it. Now, it's gone backwards again, but I'd like to know what Milwaukee has done.
Well,
Did they have to clean the streets or just prevent it from occurring in the first place? Carol?
Yeah, well, Denver just did something. The mayor basically said, that's it, I've had it. We're going to spend this amount of money, and here's what we're going to do. There was one, apparently the streets, the parks were just overrun with homeless. Right. And he went to one place that was particularly densely populated. And he said, okay, everybody here, you're out. And he had installed, I believe it was 100 individual dwelling units,
Mhm.
lined them all up, and had some kind of, bathing facilities, or at least, running water. And he said, everybody's out, they all got rounded up, and they each got put into one of these things. And that was his way of essentially appeasing the population of Denver and doing something.
Mhm.
It'll be interesting to see how that works.
Well,
They
what
just-
I've alluded to is if this pressure continues to build and the public just walks away from the urban environment, which is a reversal of what has been happening, because urbanization may in fact be one of the contributing factors as people move into urban environments and break away from their supportive neighborhoods.
Well, and people no longer working downtown, they're working from home.
Right.
They may go into the office one day a week. I mean, I read somewhere recently that some company in New York said, you have to come in 2 days a week.
Well,
But-
it leaves the core of the city, the home of the homeless. It's the new
Yeah.
institution.
Yep,
Because they're even talking now about apartment units or office complexes, which are very high vacancy rates in Edmonton and Calgary, being converted to residential units.
Right.
And there's, I know, I don't understand this, but University of Alberta tore down its student housing. That housing could have been used for the homeless, and it had all of the facilities in that environment for kitchens and recreation.
what
But they tore it
possessed
down.
them to do that?
They were aging. Universities were not sympathetic to the issues of the homeless, or at least the students might have been protesting. But we're tearing housing down at a time when we need housing, and I didn't understand that. The housing wasn't in that bad a shape, and it wouldn't have been viewed as a slum, not by any means. Okay, we're now at 15 minutes before our thrilling after party, which sometimes is more rambunctious than the webinar itself. I'm going to go around the room, see if there are any comments. Bill, any points you want to make, or David, or comments? Unmute if you'd like to make a comment, or go ahead, Bill.
It's not an area that I have a lot of reading or focus on, but a lot of the themes just keep seeming to come up across history, and the mental health issues. I think it was your allusion to very early stage intervention. And in that case, one recent thing I came up with was mentioned to me was somebody said something to the effect that a child does not need a mother, does not need a father, but a child really does need somebody to show them affection within the first 18 months of life. The consequence of not getting that within Romanian children adopted in Canada was a conclusion that once you've gone past that 18 months, it's irrecoverable for the rest of their life. There's still be finding out about that, but there's just a lot of themes I like to theme about the community, and your comment I really loved. Need is so important. Can you ask for help?
Mhm.
I can relate to that because it's not my type, but I can see how important it is, and I just don't have the habit of asking it for it enough.
It's
Other
funny,
people don't either.
zeroing in on that word that some feel that's a word of the weak. I'm of exactly the opposite opinion, that to mutter the word help is the word of the strong, and we need to teach people that it is not demeaning, it is not devaluing, it's a sign of strength to be able to reach out. Go ahead, Bogdan.
Hi, so I have been a homeless, but it was a special type of homelessness. As you know, I escaped out of Romania to Greece. And in Greece, I had to escape again out of the refugee camp, where there were fights between factions of refugees. The refugee camp was a former jail. There were close to 4,000 Muslims and roughly 80 Christians. And things were frequently drifting into violence, religion-anchored violence. So I've ended being homeless. Again, it was a different kind of homelessness because I was a refugee that was dreaming to make it to the West and build my new life. But sleeping behind garages, eating out of things that were left at the fruit market. And what made the difference was community, and was this hope in a better future. Community, although I haven't been raised religious, I went for help to churches, and my statistic is that you find 80-20 in the level of support that churches and priests offer, the same way you find 80-20 engagement. And unfortunately, is 20 of the priests are there to help and create community, and 80% of the priests are there for the business. So many churches refused help, and some very few did help. And I had the experience of staying for the meals that were provided by one of this churches, and staying in line with all the other homeless people that were using that service. And of course, again, this is a special kind of homelessness. But in this whole thing, I wanted to mention that there is one aspect that I found. So homeless people are I found them supportive. Very few were refugees. Most of them were people that had some kind of let's call it mental challenge. But in between the homeless, there was support, and my experience was again limited to that staying in line for the food that was provided. And what I felt in that line that I still remember as positive was this deeper level understanding of where you are, so to speak. So I didn't feel the envy and metric that you otherwise kind of experience in your regular social interactions. You know, like when you meet someone, you usually try to understand where are they positioned socially, where are they positioned asset-wise, and so on and so on. While in that line, everybody was in the same place. So strangely enough, for the length of that staying in line, you had a micro community.
Well, we have, Bogdan, the refugee experience is certainly one that we are increasingly aware of. In a way, we have a refugee issue in Canada that's ignored, or it doesn't come under that heading, and that's the Indigenous population that is becoming refugees in our cities. someone was estimating recently that 80% of the indigenous population in Canada now lives in the city off the reserves. And the cities haven't been ready to receive them. And they are not, in making that transition, they are unprepared for what's expected of them in a city.
Yeah.
They do get into gangs when they're young because they look, if you can't get early intervention, as the police have noted, they'll find their way into gangs and they'll be engaged in antisocial behavior. But yes, the refugee, that is an international issue. And whether they're on the streets or not, or in the tent, they're in their form of tents and they're in their communities. How do they get integrated and acculturated into our communities? Another issue.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Somebody mentioned earlier that many of the newcomers are coming from cultures that have a community.
Mhm.
And they're coming to a culture where you have to build your community. You have to get busy to actually create the cul-de-sac.
Well, you know, all of us
network.
as immigrants, and what we've got, how many million is Canada bringing into this country a year, or 500,000 last year? I mean, every one of them is potentially homeless if in fact there's not someone either within the church or some government agency, if you will, to receive them, or their culture. And I think Marg, you and Chris probably see that all the time in Toronto, which is a major center of immigration for Canada. You want to comment about the immigrant population and how it's helping itself?
Well, the thing that we notice is a lot of immigrants have families here in Toronto or in the diaspora. So there's a lot of couch surfing, a lot of people helping people.
Huh.
So it's amazing how it was 500,000 people, but a number of them were absorbed, you know, into Toronto. We don't even try to place the people that we bring into downtown Toronto because we had to pay $3,000 a month in rent for a family. So that's a bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah, but a lot of the refugees that are coming into Toronto are sponsored.
Yeah.
There's a lot of financial support, both in private, probably more financial support in the private groups than the government.
Well, and they have been much more successful than the public, than the government.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we're just in the process now of bringing a young chap from Afghanistan. He's already got a sister here. He'll be well looked after. The system is already working to get him a job, and so on and so forth. So, I don't see that 100,000 as all potentially homeless. What I see is a huge amount of talent coming into this country, quite frankly, a real energy to make a difference. That's been our experience with the refugee population, and we've had a fairly extensive
But they are, it is because of the immigration policies. They are
right.
a more professional group that are coming through. So they kind of move out and they buy property and, you know, get settled a lot.
But somewhat different than the population coming out into a group home in New Mexico.
For sure.
That's right.
I mean, the refugees coming into Canada, most of them are pre-screened, right? So that's our system.
So when someone is coming out of corrections and they're coming out alone as an individual,
that's an entirely different thing.
Do they, I'd be very interested, do they form relationships in that group home that will carry them forward that are positive?
You asking us, Terry?
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious because we've talked about how critical it is to have support, and it can be among your friends. Do they form networks that they are lifelong and everlasting?
I don't think so.
No,
I didn't think so either.
Yeah, you know, perhaps if they have a really strong supportive family, and the family's not in Section 8 housing, and they come back in and they can kind of, you know, be taken under the family's wing again and supported, and, you know, help through their difficult times, because they are going to be difficult.
Well, Tim made the observation last week that if you don't intervene early and they get into the park or into the alleys and form relationships, that becomes their new tribe or their new network.
Absolutely. No question.
And then they become anchored into that space.
That's where they're comfortable. That's what they know. you know,
Yeah.
this guy was in prison for 49 years, you know, his whole thing was being dissed.
Yeah.
And if he perceived somebody disrespecting him, you know, he went bananas.
Yeah.
And he acted totally inappropriately. And whether it was even disrespect, that was up for question. And the judge in his hearing said basically, you know, the problem is the way you think.
Yeah.
We have to change the way you think. Well, change the thinking, change the behavior.
If there, we're probably in to wrap up now, and if there's anything consistent through this discussion, it's been, this is complex. The concept of community as a place of help and support is a source of goodwill and can play an extraordinary role in prevention. And I mean prevention, not just from the first instance of something coming apart, but may work its way up that channel and do a lot more goodwill than we realize before you have to engage in professional infrastructure, professional support. But the transition from corrections, the transitions from those being dropped out of the child welfare system, the transitions of those in need of mental health support or addictions, it's not easy.
Well,
The only answer history has provided is to clean them out and put them in an institution, and we're resisting that. If we don't find answers, go ahead.
One quick thought, Perry, and that is the reason that they're having such difficulty is that the skills that they should have learned at their mother's knee, that they should have absorbed when they were between, you know, 0 and 5 or 5 and 10, they didn't get those. So it's almost like you have to push the clock all the way back to early childhood to get them restarted. You know,
I think we all have come to grips with and understand that the family, or what takes place in those early stages of your life, whether it be family or daycare, are absolutely critical. And we have also heard that even in your adolescent years, it's important that there be a significant other in your life, maybe outside of your family, that gives you the confidence that you can be in that community and you can function in that community. But you're going to need social. You need networks. We know that when people become unemployed, how critical it is that they draw on their network during that time of transition. But we haven't built networks for people coming out of the corrections. We haven't built networks for them to draw on when coming out of child welfare. We seem to be prone in dumping. And I know that's a loaded word, but if you haven't prepared that person, if you haven't prepared that community, if they haven't built the supportive infrastructure, you can't call it anything other than just dumping. And maybe their rationale is, well, you gave them to us in the first place. It's your responsibility now to take over. But something needs to change, and what's going on in the streets of Seattle, San Francisco, Edmonton is the evidence that something is failing. And we've touched on family, we've touched on the role of government, we've touched on the role of community agencies, and in particular, we've touched on the role of volunteers. And you've done an astounding job, Carol and Tim. I'm glad you joined us today. Chris and Marg, too, as friends. All of you are friends of my past. So thank you for trusting me and joining us today.